Nice. Hello. I like the look of this. I'm in the TV studio right now for the benefit of those who are watching on YouTube. And if you're just listening to the podcast, you should be watching on YouTube. Why not do both? Why not do both? So here is the Wednesday poll question at Smerconish.com. Is voting by mail secure? Is voting by mail secure? Mine is a hell yes, based on data and based just on common sense. Tomorrow night, I've been talking about this for 2 weeks, but now it's like tomorrow night, Joe Ellis, Parks Casino, performing her comedy routine at Parks Casino, open to you if you care to join. Tickets are cheap. And not only do you get Joe Ellis, but you get Joe Conklin, Philly's own Joe Conklin, the man of 1,000 voices. You also get national headliner Ian Lara, who has an HBO comedy special called Romantic Comedy, now streaming on HBO Max and recently having appeared on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. So $25 gets your first drink and all that comedy. As I've said to you, when I was last there for a comedy night at Parks Casino, what was really great is they start on time, they run a tight ship, and in the span of an hour, I saw 5 different acts. A lot of fun. 8 o'clock tomorrow night, Philly Burbs, wherever you are in the Northeast, but you've got to get your tickets. So do it now online, parkscasino.com/entertainment, and click on comedy. Welcome Joe Ellis to Parks Casino. I'm laughing already. Tomorrow night in the Philly Burbs. You got to be 21. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. So the Tuesday poll question, and it requires a brief explanation. I won't give you the full-blown review because I did it yesterday, although I've got new data. I asked, agree or disagree, it's time for Ukraine to join NATO and for the United States to invoke Article 5 and go to war with Russia. What? Go to war with Russia? Michael, why would you have asked such a thing? Well, I wanted to push the envelope. And I wanted to see, would we again get a very hawkish response to the situation between Ukraine and Russia? And my point is this: the invasion was February 24, 2022. And as you might expect, because the poll questions are also front page news driven, I'm often asking about Russia and Ukraine. And yesterday I said we were able to retrieve 39 poll results. The poll results were since October of 2022. And I documented yesterday how, with like one exception, which was Special Forces boots on the ground, anytime I ask, should the U.S. do this to help Ukraine? Should the U.S. do that to help Ukraine? The answer that carried the day was always the most hawkish. But it came with a footnote, a caveat yesterday, because long story short, we switched poll provider platforms, a lot of alliteration there, and I didn't have for you a 10-month window, which was really important. I didn't have for you immediately post-invasion through October of 2022. Hat tip to TC, because painstakingly she was able to go back and reconstruct everything in that window. So let me give you some examples. Pardon me, I've got to just scroll some notes because I want to get this right. I'll tell you something else interesting. Damn, we have come a long way. We have come a long way in terms of our poll results. So the day after Russia invades Ukraine, so now I'm talking the 25th of February, 2022, my question, will Putin's invasion of Ukraine ultimately help or hurt President Biden's political standing at home? Interesting to me that I went there and focused on the politics immediately after the invasion. Interesting as well that there were 8,617 votes, and I was probably ecstatic. Like, hey, 8,617 voted on the poll question. Will Putin's invasion of Ukraine ultimately help or hurt President Biden's political standing at home? 59.77% said it will help Biden. That's interesting. Did it help Biden? I think that Ukraine was largely a non-factor in the election. 2 days after the invasion, should NATO go to war for Ukraine? 78.49% said yes. That's amazing to me to stop and think about that. So we asked that question. How about this one? How about this? March of 2022. How does the Russian invasion of Ukraine end? Something we're still asking. 32.71% said Putin falls. 32.65% said it'll just be an ongoing war. It'll just be an ongoing war. And 23.01% said Ukraine cedes some eastern land to Russia. All very relevant today. Apparently, Lindsey Graham said the only way this is going to end is if somebody takes this guy out. So we asked that question. March 4, 2022. 72.96% agreed with Lindsey Graham that the only way it's going to end is if somebody takes out Putin. Should the United States ban all energy imports from Russia? 96% agreed. Should the media, this is odd. I wonder why I ask this. Should media outlets show Ukraine's most graphic images despite the risk that consumers might stop viewing the news? There must have been something going on at the time where we were debating that issue. Should we give them MiG fighters, MiG-29s? 83.28% said yes. Is wall-to-wall coverage of the war in Ukraine due more to the race of the combatants or the risk of nuclear war? I guess that was prompted by people who said, oh, when it's white people who are fighting, it gets all this coverage. But if there's something going on in the Congo, it doesn't get coverage. 69.51% said it's getting all the coverage because of the risk of nuclear war. I'm not going to give all of these to you because I want to do that on radio today. Let me just see if anything else jumps. Oh, how about this one? How about this one? This is interesting. March 19, 2022, which border will have a greater impact on the 2022 midterms, Ukraine and Russia or Mexico and U.S.? 45.11% said Ukraine, Russia, and they were wrong. 54.89% said Mexico-U.S. border. Anyway, to come full circle, yesterday's poll question at Smerconish.com, agree or disagree, it's time for Ukraine to join NATO, for the United States to invoke Article 5 and go to war with Russia. 55.5% disagreed. 44.5% agreed. Said differently, 44% of those who responded at my poll question yesterday said, let's just have at it. That's pretty stunning. I mean, amazing to me that when I go back 2 days after the invasion, 80% were saying that. So that number has greatly diminished. Today, the Wednesday poll question at Smerconish.com, is voting by mail secure? Is voting by mail secure? I see that yesterday, Josh Shapiro, who's up for re-election here in Pennsylvania, went on record and said that any executive order from President Trump banning mail ballots will have no impact on elections in the state. This came after, of course, President Trump announced plans to ban mail-in voting, a move that Shapiro said would be unconstitutional. I think he's right in that regard. I bring this up just as an example of the amount of attention that's being paid to Trump now saying that he wants to get rid of voting by mail. I had on the program yesterday, and he was a terrific guest, Dr. Charles Stewart III. He's the director of the MIT Election Data and Science Lab. If you want to read in about VBM, voting by mail, you can go to that MIT website where I was yesterday and I'm looking at now, because it breaks it all down, gives you a lot of great data. The Bipartisan Policy Council, BPC, also has great data on their website just about the history of mail balloting, which goes back to the Civil War, by the way. There are those states where everybody is sent a ballot, as distinguished from those states where we regard it as absentee balloting, some for cause and some where no cause is required. Pennsylvania used to be a state where you had to show cause. I remember going through that process and filling out the ballot. Well, why are you going to be away? Thank God we got rid of that. There are 6 states. I thought it was 7. Colorado, Utah, Nevada, 3, California, Oregon, and Washington. Those states are automatically, everybody's sent a ballot. And that's what President Trump likes to talk a great deal about, where he says, oh, somebody gets, 5 or 6 ballots. Maybe that happens, human factors, but there's no evidence. There's no evidence of mail-in voter fraud. Frankly, just like there's no evidence of in-person voter fraud. Shit happens. Shit happens on elections. Some people are criminals. But by and large, we have a very secure system, whether you're talking about mail-in voting. I mentioned MIT. One MIT study found that just 0.0000, 4 zeros, 5 zeros, 6, 0.506 of cases, far lower than the odds of being struck by lightning, involve voting by mail fraud. I pointed out yesterday on air that in Pennsylvania, we had litigation over Pennsylvania's voter ID law, different, but I'm going to make the same point. In March of 2012, the Pennsylvania General Assembly passed a law requiring voters to present a government-issued photo ID at the polls. And then civil rights groups and individuals sued. They argued that it would disenfranchise many voters, particularly the elderly, the poor, minorities. My view has always been, if you want to ask for a voter ID, I'm fine with that. Just make sure you're asking for the type of ID that people in a particular community are likely to have. I know it sounds like a foreign concept to some of you, but some people don't have driver's licenses. So let's accept whatever form of ID they do have. Anyway, this thing was then litigated. And during the court proceedings, the state admitted it could not point to a single documented case of in-person voter impersonation fraud in Pennsylvania. That's what I was referencing yesterday. So during litigation over the 2012 Pennsylvania voter ID law, the state conceded they had no evidence of in-person voter fraud, not a single case, and yet they had passed that law anyway. I also think intuitively that there's kind of a built-in check when you're talking about voting by mail. Because if the idea is everybody gets sent a ballot in those 6 Western states, and I live in California, and wait a minute, I didn't get my ballot. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to contact, we already got your ballot. Well, it didn't come from me. I mean, the built-in check are the individuals who are the proper voters. It necessitates that the states are constantly combing through their voter rolls. And this is something that Dr. Stewart said yesterday, that they do far better in the mail-in balloting states and get rid of the people who've passed, of course. The Wednesday poll question at Smerconish.com: is voting by mail secure? The president says that it's not. He's trying to make changes. I think he lacks the authority. I think voting by mail, not 100%, but 99% is secure, just like voting in person. Want to ask for an ID? Fine with me. But I think the cases that occur from time to time get blown out of proportion. And I'd love to continue to vote by mail. Yeah, I said yesterday, the only thing I lose in not going to a polling place is the mingle opportunity, which is valuable. When our kids were younger, always on election day, I would drive them to school and they'd watch me vote. And I'd take them into the booth when they were, yay big. That was fun stuff. And going down the gauntlet and seeing your committee person hand you the sample ballot. I used to be one of those committee people. Back in the day, in the 80s, I know what it's like to work a poll from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. and hand the Republican sample ballot. Here's your Republican, madam. Here is your Republican sample ballot. Bonding experiences. It's kind of funny. I was the assistant, it's a story for a different day. I was the assistant committee man to a committee man who was then elected judge and became the president judge of the county, Bucks County, in which I was born and raised. A wonderful guy, Robert O. Baldy, Bob Baldy. He was a young lawyer, and I was in college, and I was his assistant committee man. Good guy. All right, go vote. Is voting by mail secure? Is voting by mail secure? I'm a yes vote. I'll see you later on radio.